The night was unbearably cold on the alien ship. Thalira, a striking alien woman with silver-blue skin and translucent veins that faintly glowed in the dim light, sat stiffly on one edge of the cramped bed. Her long limbs were drawn up, knees tucked tightly to her chest. The room, a small, sterile compartment in the ship's lower deck, was more of a holding cell than a place to rest. The metal walls seemed to intensify the cold, and the low hum of the ship's engines did little to drown out the tension in the air. The human male, Kale, had been unexpectedly assigned to share her quarters due to a malfunction in the ship's systems. The bed, a simple but large piece of equipment, was the only option for the two of them. Neither of them spoke as they exchanged wary glances, both aware of the unspoken rule in situations like this: stay on your side. But there was no avoiding the inevitable. Thalira's eyes narrowed at the human, her expression unreadable. She had been trained to dominate, to rule, to be the queen of her realm. Sharing space with a human, particularly one she had no interest in, went against every instinct in her body. She couldn't understand why, but the heat of Kyle's presence unsettled her more than it should. Kyle, for his part, was trying to remain calm. He had been thrust into an alien environment he barely understood, trapped in a space with someone who viewed him as little more than a nuisance, perhaps even a pet. Yet, despite her coldness, he couldn't help but be aware of her. Her beauty was undeniable, her alien features captivating in a way he hadn't anticipated. The way her skin seemed to shimmer under the low lights of the room was almost hypnotic, and he found himself involuntarily glancing at her whenever she shifted. He knew it was dangerous to feel anything toward her, but there was something magnetic about Thalira. Perhaps it was her strength, her unmistakable air of command that she seemed to exude even when seated in silence. Or maybe it was the way her eyes flickered over him, sharp and calculating, as if she were trying to figure out how best to handle this human that she couldn't quite ignore. Thalira, for all her training in control, couldn't stop the awareness that was creeping over her. She was aware of his eyes on her, how his gaze lingered when it shouldn't. He was noticing her in a way no one else ever had. His interest was both irritating and intriguing. She tried to shake off the sensation, but her pulse quickened every time she saw him shift his position, as though he was attempting to find comfort near her. Kyle shifted on the bed, struggling to get comfortable. The cold was unbearable, and there was only one thin blanket shared between them. Every time he moved, he could feel the heat radiating off Thalira, and it both frustrated and fascinated him. He hadn't expected this, being trapped so closely with her, the alien who could easily break him, yet there was something about her that drew him in. There were moments when he thought he saw vulnerability behind her ice-cold exterior. When their eyes met, there was a flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe even desire. He couldn't tell if it was his imagination or if she, too, was feeling this pull. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't indifferent to her. The cold grew more intense as the night wore on, and both of them were unable to keep still. Kale reached for the blanket, only for Thalira's hand to snap out and claim it first. The brief contact of their skin sent a shock through Kale's body, his heart hammering in his chest as he tried to regain his composure. "You take it," he said, his voice rough, unable to hide the tension that had built between them. But Thalira's eyes were narrowed as she slowly pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I'm fine," she replied, her tone cool, though the hint of something else, something more primal, was in her eyes. Kale, despite his better judgment, found himself reaching out once more, brushing against her arm as he tried to pull the blanket free. This time, Thalira didn't pull away, and the physical proximity became undeniable. The warmth between them was becoming too much to ignore. Their faces were inches apart now, the temperature of their bodies mingling. And just like that, neither of them could move, both frozen in the charged silence of the room. The tension was unbearable as the cold night seemed to draw them closer. their bodies inches away but their emotions miles apart. Neither of them knew how much longer they could last in this delicate game of proximity and restraint. The silence stretched between them, thick and charged with tension, each breath in the room heavy with something neither of them could name. Thalira's pulse quickened as Kael's gaze lingered on her, and though she wanted to be annoyed, to tell him to look away, she found herself frozen, caught in the same moment of unspoken attraction. She couldn't remember the last time she had been so close to anyone, let alone a human, and it unsettled her in ways she wasn't prepared for. Kael's body, so distinctly human in its warmth and softness, felt almost foreign against the cool, unyielding presence of Thalira. The subtle shift of her muscles, the faint ripple of movement beneath her skin, was enough to make his heart race. Her alien beauty, the way her veins glowed faintly beneath her skin, was mesmerizing. But it was the way she seemed to exude power, despite her stillness, that truly took him by surprise. He wanted to move, to escape the stifling tension, but he found himself hesitating. His body was telling him to pull back, to remain just on his side of the bed, but something about the atmosphere in the room urged him to test the boundaries. He swallowed, shifting again, this time with more purpose, brushing against her. The feeling of her skin under his hand sent a wave of heat through him, his heart thumping louder than before. Thalira barely resisted the instinct to pull away. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the touch of his hand against her skin igniting a reaction that startled her. Control, she reminded herself. She had to stay in control. She had been bred for this, trained to withstand emotions, to remain untouchable. But the pressure in her chest, the quiet, insistent flutter in her stomach, was difficult to ignore. Why does he affect me like this? She could feel the way her body responded to him, how her breath came a little faster. When their hands brushed, how her chest tightened when he shifted closer. But she refused to acknowledge it, to give in to whatever this strange sensation was. Kael, on the other hand, had no such reservations. His body betrayed him in ways he couldn't understand. He wasn't supposed to feel this way about her. He wasn't supposed to crave the closeness, the heat of her body, but every inch of him screamed to be nearer to her. She was a force, so different from anything he had ever known, so alien. And yet, in some inexplicable way, she felt right. He leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper, almost as though he feared the quiet room would swallow him, whole. "Thalira, I don't know how much longer I can pretend this isn't driving me crazy." The words spilled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable, laced with the frustration he had been trying to suppress. Her eyes met his, dark and unreadable, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The air was thick with something, deeper than the cold, something that neither of them could explain. "Then don't," Thalira replied, her voice low, but not without its own edge of something daring. She wasn't sure why she said it, but she couldn't take back the challenge that slipped from her lips. For a long moment, Kael stared at her, and then, as if driven by some unseen force, he leaned forward again, this time deliberately, with a subtle but unmistakable intent. His hand brushed against her arm again, and this time she didn't pull away. The space between them was narrowing, slowly, deliberately, until their faces were inches apart, the breath between them warm and charged. Thalira's heartbeat raced in her chest as she met his gaze. She could see the way his eyes were drawn to her lips, the way his own lips parted slightly as though he was struggling with the same internal battle. And for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to give in, to allow herself to feel what he was feeling. But the moment was fleeting. With a sharp intake of breath, Thalira pushed herself back, her mind screaming at her to maintain control. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as though it could shield her from the strange pull between them. Kael, too, recoiled, his breathing unsteady. The room felt even colder now, despite the proximity. He could feel the tension like an invisible rope between them, drawing them closer even though their bodies pulled apart. His mind raced, trying to process the storm of emotions swirling. Inside him, want, frustration, confusion. He had never felt so out of control, so exposed. They both sat in silence for several long moments, each of them wrestling with their own thoughts. Neither of them spoke, but their bodies said everything. Cale's hand clenched into a fist at his side, fighting the urge to reach for her again. He wanted to apologize, to take back his impulsive words, but he couldn't shake the sense that this was bigger than them both. This was more than a physical attraction. It was something deeper, something unspoken, that neither of them understood. Thalira, too, struggled with her emotions. She hated feeling vulnerable, especially in front of a human. She had built walls around herself for years. Her mind a fortress, her heart untouched by anyone. But Cale was different. And the worst part was, she didn't know if she wanted to keep him at a distance anymore. The struggle between them was palpable, both physical and emotional, as they sat, the distance between them only adding to the frustration that simmered beneath the surface. Neither of them knew how much longer they could keep pretending that this strange, impossible connection wasn't beginning to change everything. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but despite the cold and the tension, there was something undeniable hanging in the air. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to finally give in to the undeniable pull that had been building between them. Thalira lay rigid in her corner of the bed, her body still wrapped in the thin blanket, her mind racing. The earlier exchange, those brief moments of vulnerability, had left her unsettled in a way she wasn't used to. She had always been in control, always the one who set the rules. And yet, with Cale, everything was different. Cale, on the other hand, couldn't stop the frustration that was building within him. He had wanted to understand this alien woman, this being who seemed to exist so far beyond anything he could comprehend. But now, after those fleeting moments of closeness, he found himself torn between the physical urge to pull her closer and the emotional urge to hold back, to respect her boundaries, even if they felt like an impossible distance. But that silence between them was suffocating. Every time he looked at her, he saw something more than just the cold, calculating alien who had been forced into this situation. He saw vulnerability, conflict, feelings that she was hiding, feelings that mirrored his own. He had never felt so raw, so exposed in his entire life. But there was something that drove him to push forward, to keep trying. Thalira's chest tightened as she stared at the far wall, trying to push the thoughts of Cale from her mind. Why does he affect me? Like this? She had kept her distance for so long, had hardened herself to the emotions of others. Her species wasn't one for weakness, but Cale was different. The way his touch had sent waves of heat through her body, the way his eyes held hers with that strange mixture of desire and confusion, it made her feel things she hadn't felt in years, if ever. She had to keep herself in check. She had to remind herself that he was still only human. This cannot happen. But then Cale's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady, his words gentle but carrying a weight she hadn't expected. Thalira. He said her name softly, almost as if testing the sound of it on his lips. We can't keep doing this, pretending this isn't real. His voice was rough with emotion, the edges of it fraying in a way that sent a ripple through her. The intensity in his words pierced through the walls she had carefully constructed around herself. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the warmth of his gaze locking with hers. His eyes, so full of vulnerability and longing, suddenly felt like an open invitation. For the first time in hours, she realized she didn't want to run anymore. I can't keep running. Kyle shifted closer, slowly, cautiously. He didn't know what kind of response he was expecting, but the urgency in him was undeniable. He reached for her arm, his touch feather-light at first, as if giving her the chance to push him away. But when she didn't pull back, he moved closer, his face inches from hers. "I can't stop thinking about you," Cale admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Every part of me is telling me to pull away, to keep my distance, but I can't. I want you, and I'm not sure how to deal with that." Thalira's breath caught in her throat, the words hitting her harder than she cared to admit. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the intensity of his confession a catalyst for everything she had been trying to suppress. She had wanted to stay detached, to keep the cold, impervious queen that everyone else saw. But something about Cale, his honesty, his rawness, was like a mirror, reflecting back all the things she had buried deep inside. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to maintain her composure. "You don't know what this would mean for me, for my people." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they were the truth. If she gave in to this desire, it would shatter everything she had worked for, everything she had been trained to protect. Cale's hand cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing the soft skin beneath her eye. "I don't care about your people, Thalira. I care about you. I've never cared about anything like this before." His voice was steady now, strong, as though he had come to a decision he couldn't take back. "I won't pretend anymore. Not when this, whatever this is, feels too real." Her breath hitched in her throat, her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. She was frozen, caught between her duty and her desires, between the pride she had spent a lifetime cultivating, and the undeniable pull of a human who, against all odds, had managed to reach her in a way no one else had. Kyle's gaze softened, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, and Thalira felt herself leaning into the touch without meaning to, her body betraying the calm mask she had worked so hard to maintain. For a moment, everything seemed still. There was no ship, no rules, no cold nights. There was just Kyle, his warmth, his presence, the way he made her feel seen, something no one had ever done before. It was terrifying, and yet it was the most exhilarating thing she had ever experienced. "I don't know what's going to happen after this," Cale murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this. Not anymore." Thalira's breath faltered, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering the strength to face what she knew was inevitable. She had fought this, resisted it, told herself that she could never give in to such a thing. But in the end, it wasn't something that could be ignored. Not when it felt like her heart had already made the decision for her. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze locked with his, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside her. She didn't know where this would lead, or how it would end. But in that moment, there was no turning back. "I don't know what this means either," she said softly, her voice raw. "But I'm tired of pretending." With that, the final barriers between them crumbled, and the night stretched on, no longer just cold and full of tension, but heated with something far more dangerous, far more powerful than either of them could have expected. The cold air of the room seemed to recede, as the tension between them began to dissolve. Kyle's breath was still shaky, his heart racing as if it had a mind of its own, but now there was a new, almost tender energy that filled the space around them. Thalira was no longer the distant, unreachable figure she had been when the night began. She was here, in his arms, her alien warmth mingling with his own. Kyle gently pulled away from their embrace, his hands still lingering at her sides as if he couldn't quite let go. He searched her face for any sign of regret, but all he saw was the vulnerability he had never expected to find in her, the queen who had always been in control, the warrior who had never been caught off guard. Now, her eyes were wide, shimmering with something deeper than he had seen before. Thalira's chest heaved with every breath she took, her mind still struggling to process everything that had just happened. The warmth of Cale's touch still burned on her skin, and though the immediate tension had passed, there was a quiet storm raging within her. She wasn't used to this, wasn't used to being this close. Her kind didn't share emotions so easily. She was a queen, a commander, meant to lead and to keep her heart shielded. But in Cale's arms, all of that had shattered. She felt exposed, raw, and more vulnerable than she had ever allowed herself to be. She pulled away slightly, turning her back to him for just a moment. Thalira's voice faltered as she spoke, and she couldn't continue. How could she put into words the confusion that roiled inside her? The words she had been trained to speak, the commands, the orders, none of them fit this situation. None of them made sense anymore. Kyle, sensing the shift in her demeanor, reached out, his fingers brushing against her shoulder gently. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his voice filled with a softness that almost startled him. "But I need you to know, this wasn't just about tonight for me. I've never felt anything like this before. Not for anyone. Not even for you." His words hung in the air between them, and for a long time Thalira didn't know how to respond. She had always prided herself on her control, her ability to stay composed, to shield her emotions from anyone or anything. But now, with Kyle's touch lingering on her skin, the world felt different, fragile in a way she hadn't experienced before. "I don't know what to do with this," she said quietly, her voice shaky but genuine. She didn't dare look at him just yet, not wanting him to see the depth of her internal struggle, the conflict that warred within her. How could she trust this? Trust him? Her entire existence had been built on control, on keeping things from spiraling out of her hands. And yet here she was, every part of her crumbling under the weight of emotion she didn't know how to handle. Kyle took a step closer, closing the distance between them. He wasn't sure what had possessed him to be this patient, to let her take her time with all of this. Perhaps it was his own vulnerability, his own need to show her that he understood. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice gentle, but resolute. "But I'm here for whatever you need. Whatever this is, it's real." Thalira finally turned toward him, her eyes meeting his with a depth that made his chest tighten. She saw the sincerity in his gaze, the warmth that came not just from his body, but from his heart. It was the first time in her life that she truly understood what it meant to be seen, and in that moment she couldn't pull away. She couldn't deny what was happening inside her. But the walls inside her, the walls she had spent so many years building, were still there, even if they were crumbling. She wasn't ready to surrender everything, not yet, not to him. But something in her, something she couldn't quite name, urged her to take the next step, to let him in just a little further. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing over the side of his face, a slow and tentative gesture, but one that spoke volumes. She was terrified, but she wanted this, wanted him, and that terrified her even more. Kyle's breath caught as she touched him, her fingers light and hesitant on his skin. He felt like he was about to break apart, torn between the urge to push forward, to pull her close and never let go, and the need to give her space, to let her come to him on her own terms. "Thalira," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to pressure you, but I can't stand pretending that I don't care about you. I can't pretend that I don't want more than this." For a moment, Thalira just stared at him, her mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. She had been trained not to feel, not to give in to such human emotions. But now, she realized, she was already too far gone. She had crossed the line between resistance and acceptance, but the fear still lingered, cold and sharp, beneath the warmth of the moment. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid of everything. Cale's heart ached at the admission. He reached out again, pulling her gently into his arms, enveloping her in his warmth. He didn't have the answers. He didn't know how this would end or where it would take them, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. I'm here, Thalira, he murmured, pressing a kiss against the top of her head. Whatever you need. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. The Tsar. Words were simple, but they resonated deep within her. Something inside her giving way as the first real feeling of trust began to take root. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever fully surrender herself to him, but for the first time, the fear wasn't enough to keep her from holding on. The night stretched on, and they lay there in the quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But somehow, there was a peace in the shared silence. It wasn't a resolution, not yet. But it was the beginning of something fragile, something real. And for the first time in a long while, Thalira allowed herself to believe in it. The dawn came slowly, creeping through the edges of the blinds, casting pale light across the room where they lay. It was quieter now, the weight of the night's event sinking into both of them in equal measure. Cale and Thalira had not spoken much since the raw exchange of emotions, but there was an unspoken understanding that hung in the air. A new kind of tension had settled, softer, more intimate, but no less intense. For the first time, they were no longer battling the chasm between them, the gulf of species, of cultures, of fears, but rather learning how to navigate the space in between. Cale shifted, his eyes opening to the warmth of the morning sun. His arm was still draped over Thalira's waist, his body pressed close to hers. He felt the rise and fall of her chest with each breath, and though she had been so distant and unyielding before, she was now just as present as he was. They had reached a turning point. What had once been a standoff between two opposing forces was now something new. A quiet intimacy neither of them had expected, but both had craved. Thalira shifted slightly, stretching. But then her movements stilled when she felt Cale's arm around her. She could feel the heat of his skin against hers, the softness of his touch, and for a moment, she didn't know how to react. Her mind was still swirling, a whirl of confusion and uncertainty, but there was something else there, something gentle, almost fragile, that she hadn't expected to find. It was an understanding, a connection, something that had started as a raw physical need, something driven by biology, had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them could easily name, but both of them could feel. The cold walls she had so carefully built around herself had begun to crumble, and with it, her ability to resist the human beside her had started to fade. Kyle didn't rush her. He never did. He understood, in a way she hadn't expected, that trust wasn't something that could be forced, that intimacy wasn't a thing to be bargained for. It had to come naturally, as if born of its own accord. And in that moment, all he wanted was to give her the time she needed, to allow her to take the lead when she was ready, but to be there, always, no matter what. Her voice broke the silence, soft and hesitant. Cale. Her name on her lips was a stark contrast to the fierce queen she had once been. It was tender, uncertain, and full of the vulnerability that had seeped into her heart. What happens now? Cale didn't answer immediately. He just held her, his arm tightening just slightly around her, his fingers tracing small, slow circles along her arm. He didn't have the perfect answer. The future was still uncertain, both for them and for their worlds. But what he did know was this: whatever happened, they would face it together. We take it one step at a time, Cale murmured, his voice steady, filled with the quiet conviction that had drawn her to him in the first place. We don't have to have it all figured out now, Thalira. We're here together, and that's enough. For now, it's enough. For a moment, she just lay there, processing his words, feeling the comfort of his presence. His touch wasn't demanding anymore, wasn't filled with urgency. It was soft, understanding, and patient. And for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to be perfect, didn't have to have all the answers. She could simply be. "You're right," Thalira whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've spent so much of my life fighting against things I didn't understand, trying to control everything. But with you, with this..." She trailed off, unsure of how to express what she was feeling, what was unfolding inside her. "It's like I'm finally letting go of all of that. And I don't know what that means, Cale, but it feels real." Cale finished for her, his voice tender, the hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "It feels real. I get it." Her breath hitched in her throat, and she lifted her gaze to meet his. There, in the softness of the morning light, they were no longer enemies or strangers or even reluctant companions. They were simply two beings, two souls, learning how to exist in the same space, to breathe together, to share something neither of them had ever expected to find. Thalira could feel the weight of her own doubts, her own fears that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't capable of opening up to him fully, that she might hurt him. But she couldn't ignore the truth of the feelings that had blossomed between them. She had feared vulnerability for so long, had fought against it, but now she was discovering something she hadn't known she wanted: trust. Trust not just in Cale, but in herself. "I don't know if I can ever be as open as you are," Thalira admitted quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. "But for the first time, I'm not so afraid to try." Kyle smiled gently, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "You don't have to be like me, Thalira. You just have to be you. That's all I've ever wanted." She smiled at that, a soft, fragile smile that lit up her features in a way Cale had never seen before. It was the kind of smile that spoke volumes, of uncertainty, of fear, but also of hope, of something that was beginning to take root between them. "I don't know where this is going," Thalira said, her voice still quiet, but stronger now, more certain. "But I want to find out." Cale's hand cupped her face, his thumb running along her jawline in the slow, deliberate way that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't need to say anything more. He just leaned in and kissed her, not with the urgency of before, but with a tenderness that mirrored the emotions they both felt in that moment. It was a kiss of understanding, of new beginnings, and of promises that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. When they pulled away, both of them were breathless, but there was a contentment in their silence, a sense of peace that had never been there before. The future still loomed before them, uncertain and filled with challenges, but for now, in this moment, all that mattered was the quiet connection between them. They had taken the first step together, and that was enough. They didn't need to rush. They had all the time in the world. And for the first time, Thalira felt like she could face it, not with fear or uncertainty, but with a heart that was ready to trust. The room was still, save for the soft hum of the ship's systems working quietly in the background. Kyle lay beside Thalira, the air between them filled with the weight of unspoken words. The tension that had existed before, the physical struggle, the emotional distance, was no longer palpable. Instead, there was an undeniable intimacy, one that both of them had felt building over the past few days. It was raw, unrefined, but real. Thalira had never been good at letting down her guard. Her entire life had been built on control, on authority, on keeping her emotions in check. It was how she had survived, how she had thrived as a leader, as a force to be reckoned with. But with Kyle, something shifted. He didn't demand control, didn't try to overpower her. He simply existed, steady, and unwavering. And for the first time she found herself wanting to exist alongside him, not as a queen or a warrior, but simply as Thalira. She turned her head to look at him, his features softened in the dim light of the room, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. For a moment she just watched him, unsure of how to move forward. They had come so far, yet there was still so much they hadn't said, so much they hadn't explored. The space between them felt full, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though they were both holding their breath, waiting for the next step to reveal itself. Kyle's eyes opened, and for a second, it seemed like he had been waiting for her too. The air around them was thick with the understanding that had been forged in the fires of their struggle and their vulnerability. He reached out, his hand resting gently on her arm, his touch a grounding force, a reminder that they were still here, still together. "Thalira," he said softly, his voice warm and steady. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but I need to know where we stand." Her heart beat a little faster, and she pulled in a slow, steady breath. She had never been good at expressing what she was feeling, not in the way Kyle was, not in the open, unguarded way that came so easily to him. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of what it would mean, of what it would cost her. For the first time, she was ready to face what had been growing between them, to acknowledge it, to embrace it. She shifted, leaning closer to him, her fingers brushing against the side of his face, tracing the rough outline of his jaw. The contact sent a ripple of warmth through her, a spark of something deep and uncontrollable. "I'm not sure what to call it, Kale," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you, not of what's between us. I don't know where it's going, but I want to find out. I want to see what's beyond the walls I've built around myself." Kale's gaze softened, and he turned his face into her touch, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I've never asked you to be anything you're not, Thalira," he whispered. "All I've ever wanted is you, in whatever form that takes. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real." Her breath hitched at his words. The vulnerability in them, the honesty, it was something she hadn't expected, something she hadn't known she needed. She was used to being in control, used to being the one who called the shots, but Kyle's willingness to meet her where she was, it was humbling in the most profound way. "I don't know how to be vulnerable," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But with you, it doesn't feel so impossible." Kale smiled, that warm, comforting smile that had become a constant in her life over the last few days. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as though he was afraid she would slip away. "Then we'll figure it out together," he murmured. "One step at a time. We don't have to have all the answers." For a long while they simply lay there, tangled in each other's arms, allowing the quiet moments to wash over them. It was different now. The passion that had once driven them, the fiery tension that had kept them at odds, had softened into something deeper, something more profound. There were no more struggles to conquer, no more barriers to break. They had arrived at a place of understanding, of mutual respect. And that understanding was enough. Thalira pulled back slightly, her gaze searching Kale's face, as though she was seeing him for the first time. She had known him as a human, someone raw, untamed, full of contradictions. But now she was beginning to understand him on a deeper level. He wasn't just a human. He was Kale, strong, patient, unwavering Kale. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to be with him, to experience all that he had to offer, and all that she was beginning to offer in return. "I want to be with you, Kale," she whispered, her fingers brushing through his hair. "In every way. No barriers, no walls. Just us." The words hung in the air, a declaration that she had never expected to make. It was raw, unrefined, but it was the truth. She wanted him, needed him, in a way that went beyond the physical. She wanted the connection they had built, the quiet moments, the moments of intense passion, the quiet support. She wanted it all. Kyle's eyes softened, and he leaned in, pressing his forehead gently to hers. Then we'll have that, Thalira. Together. No matter what comes next, I'm with you. The sincerity in his voice, the depth of his feelings, hit her like a wave. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the feeling of being held, of being wanted, not for her status, not for her strength, but for who she truly was. They didn't need words anymore. Everything that needed to be said was in the quiet space between them, in the way their bodies moved together, in the tender brush of fingertips against skin. This was no longer a battle of wills, no longer a struggle for dominance. It was simply two people learning how to be together, learning how to trust each other completely. In that moment, everything felt right. They didn't need to understand the future or worry about what lay ahead. They had each other, and that was enough. For now, it was enough.